'69 was horrific because of the burnings out, because of the turmoil that took place in the ghettos. It committed everyone to either defence or attack, but it committed people to be counted.
The realisation that the nationalist people were under attack, there was nobody to defend them. I was a member of the nationalist community at that time. Okay, I was only 15 and a half, but I knew what I had to do, and I did it. And I joined the struggle from then on.
When '69 occurred, my father, who had never, and I think this is a conscious decision on his part, never talked about the IRA or talked about armed resistance or glorified in past IRA campaigns, started to equate developments and started to talk freely for the first time about comparisons between what we were going through and rioting that had taken place in the 30s and in the 20s.
I'll never forget the first time I seen somebody walking down the street with a rifle, and this was in Cumber Street, and taking up position to return fire. And these were just ordinary blokes that lived in the area, and they were taking up arms to defend it.
To avert civil war in the province and the possibility of a pogrom against Catholics in Belfast, the British government had been forced to send in the British Army. With the army now on the streets, the British government would have to concern itself more directly with the politics of Northern Ireland. But interest and intervention had come too late. Events now had a relentless logic of their own. In the ghettos of scarred and gutted streets that the army now patrolled, the IRA had begun to reorganize. The prospect of armed Republicans produced an inevitable reaction amongst militant Protestants.
You felt the whole tension, all over the whole Ulster, where you lived and all, you know what I mean? There was a very thing atmosphere, cold atmosphere and everything. And then you start to realise, well, something's happened here now, like, because they're not just throwing stones and all now, they're using guns.
I know it's hard for a Protestant to say, but I think it was really the Protestants that brought forward the upsurge of the Provos at that time by the actions it took. I don't disagree with the actions because it was the only thing we could do in those days. There was nothing else we could do. We could either just sit back and let the civil rights trample us down, and I, for one, was never willing to do that.
I felt that what I'd been brought up to believe and was being taken away from me, what my parents had worked hard for to build up a home and a decent family, was all suddenly going to be taken off them. And it took them 30 years to build our home and family up, and somebody was just going to come in and take it off them. Well, I said to myself, this isn't on.
We knew something like this was going to happen. Not to the scale it did happen, but it was going to come out. And we expected it. But it hardened the case in my part to really then fight fire with fire. And the only way then to get rid of civil rights, the IRA, the lot, was to wipe them off the face of the earth. And this was the basic attitude of mine and I had to start.
Protestants from Spring Martin Estate formed up 300 yards away across waste ground behind Union Jacks. The tension increased. Troops were moved up further along the road towards the Catholic crowd. A man who tried to make a lone dash towards the Protestants was hauled back by friends.
The present phase of the Troubles, the longest in Ireland's history, had begun.
After an earlier confrontation down the end, which looked at the time like a kind of civil rights clash we knew from years ago.
A few minutes later, the first exploded.
The army have said throughout the day that they hope to use minimum force, but 3 hours after the procession began, this has ended up. Dust comes onto the bogside. It's the worst ever confrontation. 3 hours. The army, Craighan and bogside.
Twice before, the army has successfully defused bombs, but today the terrorists managed to hit a primary target.
First among the causes, the Commission puts the growing sense of injustice and grievances of Catholics over inadequate housing and unfair allocation of houses by some local authorities. Powers Act and the existence of the police specials as a partisan force dominated exclusively.
Next time on The Troubles.
The Bogside, Derry, August 1969. Tear gas is used for the first time in the United Kingdom as law and order collapses in Northern Ireland. Catholics, in a minority of 1 to 2 in the province, had finally rebelled against a Protestant state that had exploited and neglected them. Londonderry, second city of Northern Ireland. Two generations of teenagers have confronted the army during the years of the current troubles. Scenes of stone-throwing youths are familiar enough in Derry to attract only mild interest from bystanders. In the early 70s, confrontations like these were regular enough to become known as the Saturday matinee. This riot in the Catholic area, known as the Bogside, followed the Protestant Apprentice Boys' March in August 1980 and was unremarkable enough to go unreported. The Apprentice Boys' March is usually followed by a Catholic riot. In 1969, it lasted 3 days and is remembered as the Battle of the Bogside. It was the climax of the Troubles that year and led directly to the intervention of the British government and army. The Bogside, Derry, August 1969. Tear gas is used for the first time in the United Kingdom as law and order collapses in Northern Ireland. Catholics, in a minority of 1 to 2 in the province, had finally rebelled against a Protestant state that had exploited and neglected them. For 3 days and nights, Catholics in the Bogside kept the Protestant police at bay. On the third night, rioting spread across the province, bringing it to the precipice of civil war. In the ghettos of Belfast, the position of the Catholics was particularly serious. Under attack by Protestants, Catholic streets were burnt virtually to the ground, and it seemed possible that there might be a pogrom. 8 people died that night, and hundreds were injured as the police lost control. The morning saw Catholics fleeing the sectarian divide, and after the rioting had subsided, 1,500 Catholics and 300 Protestants had lost their homes. Peace had been restored by the presence of the British Army. It was only the day before that the British government had decided reluctantly that troops would have to be used in Northern Ireland to hold the warring factions apart, assist the exhausted police force, prevent further loss of life, and protect property. Ministers were aware of the problems of committing the army to the streets of the province, but the alternative was civil war. In the eerie calm that now descended on the province, both politicians and soldiers knew that it was going to be easier to send the troops in than to get them out. Now the British government and its army were inextricably caught up in Northern Ireland and its future. The people of Belfast, particularly the Catholics, welcomed the army. They brought an end to the burnings and killings. But armies are not constabularies, and soldiers are not policemen, nor are they a substitute for cogent political policies. No one knew this better than the army.
The honeymoon period cannot, I do not think, continue forever, obviously. We're perhaps at the peak now, where everybody's smiling and swapping cups of tea and all this sort of business and cracking jokes. But unless there is a solution or some hope for the future, and this is where the politicians have got to come in, the soldiers are not going to be welcomed on the streets for forever and ever.
The Home Secretary, James Callaghan, visited the troubled province on the 27th of August, 1969. For 45 years, British politicians had ignored Northern Ireland. It was the business of a Home Office department which also regulated London taxicabs in British summertime. No senior civil servant in Whitehall had worked full-time on Northern Ireland.
Well, you must have got thousands of pictures of us by now. We're not as handsome as all that. If we were Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, come on.
Yes, we're interested. In Derry's Bogside, Callaghan was greeted by enthusiastic crowds. John Hume, a moderate Catholic politician, also welcomed him.
On behalf of the people who are, in my view, the living symbols of injustice in Northern Ireland, I welcome you here because you will find in this area the worst housing and the highest unemployment and the heaviest immigration. And I hope you're bringing the solution with you.
Sir, this is Mr. Cooper too.
I'm very glad to come. Very glad indeed to be here and to see everybody, and I want to be able to see everybody.
Please hold back, please.
Already the British government had announced that the B specials would be phased out, and Callaghan's civil servants were reviewing discrimination in housing and jobs. Caught in the crowd, he was forced to address the Bogsiders from an upstairs window.
I was told yesterday that I was welcome because I am neutral. I replied, I am not neutral. I am on the side of those, whoever they may be, and in whatever community they live, who are deprived of justice and of freedom.
In Belfast, the army would soon be confronted with the complexity of Ulster street politics. In the August fighting, both Protestants and Catholics had protected their districts by building barricades. The politicians ordered the army to pull them down and erect an official barrier, a peace line to keep the two communities apart. Both sides were suspicious, but they reluctantly agreed. Leader of the Protestant Shankill Defence Association, John McCaig.
The idea is here, take this barricade down now, and we'll conform with the government's plan that we give them time to get their plans implemented into the other side. Now, if they don't take action into the Bogside and into the Falls Road area of Belfast, this and the Short Strand, these barricades will go up higher on Monday morning.
Meanwhile, across the city, the army was having difficulty in Dover Street, one half of which was Catholic, the other Protestant.
We've had a hold-up for some reason. They're just saying about it now.
Hey, he wants up.
Yes. Who's saying who?
General Freeland saw for himself the subtleties of the sectarian geography of Belfast.
Was it materials or,
No, sir, we don't.
or exactly where to put it?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Their own places, yes.
Can I speak? Can I speak? Can I speak?
Of course you can, everybody.
Well, we live in Beverly Street.
Oh, yeah.
This is Beverly Street down here. What's they putting a barrier here for?
And that street land either.
And us land, yes.
I think we better leave it to whoever's arranging it.
Yeah, well, wait to see about it.
There's a way to City Hall to see about it. Oh, have they? They've gone now, have they? Oh, yeah. That's good. We want to try and get everybody to agree where to put it.
Yes, but this was arranged in the City Hall, sir, where the barrier was going.
Oh, was it?
Between the councils.
Well, they're other people who got to say where to put it, because we don't know.
Yes, they have already said where to put it, and that is the wrong place.
I see.
And I have tried to tell them all
I
the
see.
morning.
Oh, I see. Well, they probably don't quite know. We'll sort it out.
Main reason being for the barricades to be negotiated were that some of them were facing snipers' fire. And the one down there, and this one at the very top, were the ones that were facing the snipers' fire. And they were to be negotiated to be not necessarily to be taken down. Well, we didn't get that privilege of even speaking to you.
Somebody has decided they can come down. Not up to me. I'm here to see it goes down fairly and squarely, okay, without trouble.
Only if the army was seen to be fair in a climate of political progress would it continue to be regarded as impartial. However, no major political initiative was taken. The use of the B Specials, the Protestant Police Reserve, had inflamed the rioting of the summer. Now they were obliged to surrender the arms they'd kept at home to a central armory. This worried Protestants, who regarded the B Specials as their protectors against militant Republicans. Paisley voiced Protestant fears.
The government will find that they will not be able to jackboot the Protestants any longer into the ground. I'm warning them that if they continue this policy of selling out Protestants and of trampling on Protestants and denying Protestants their rights, there's going to be an affair in Ulster that all the restraining voice that I might raise will no longer be heeded to.
On the day after a government report had recommended the abolition of the B Specials, Protestants rioted in the Shankill Road and confronted the army. That night, snipers opened fire, and the army returned it.
The rules are extremely clear, and every soldier knows this, too, that if a person is shooting at us and our lives are in danger, and we can identify the person who's actually shooting at us, then we may return that fire with one round, and we shoot to kill.
3 men, 2 civilians and a police constable were shot dead. 66 people were injured. The following night, the army drove into the Shankill Road and searched the area for arms. Hostile Protestant crowd shouted, "Englishmen go home, we want the B Specials." They felt betrayed by the Westminster government. The next few months were relatively quiet, but as the army patrolled the winter streets, resentment began to grow in the Catholic ghettos across the city. A series of arms searches began this process of disaffection with the army. The IRA, dormant since 1962, was reorganizing. A split in the movement led to the emergence of the Provisional IRA, committed to the use of force.
You will be obliged to use more gas.
A Protestant march had provoked a riot in the Catholic estate of Ballymurphy. This time it was the British Army who held the Catholics at bay. Catholics now began to see the army as shoring up the system that oppressed them. The Provisionals' bombs were directed at commercial targets in the centres of Belfast and Derry. By forcing the army to protect the city centres, they hoped to deflect them from the Catholic ghettos where the provisional organisation was developing. Protestants were incensed by the campaign, since their businesses were its main target. By the end of June, there had been 54 bomb explosions, not all of them the responsibility of the Provisionals. No one had been killed. June 1970. Despite army advice, Chichester Clerk again allowed the round of summer marches. This one, commemorating the Protestant sacrifice for Britain at the Battle of the Somme, passed by Catholic areas. Rioting was inevitable. Disorder spread across the city. After this film was taken, in the tiny Catholic enclave of Short Strand, surrounded by Protestant East Belfast, the Provisional IRA used guns for the first time to defend one of its districts. In the middle of these disturbances, the worst for a year, Reginald Maudling, Home Secretary, arrived in Belfast.
First of all, I think there is an impression in some quarters that the change of government in Westminster would mean a change of policy towards Northern Ireland. This, I may assure you, is not so. There is no change of policy towards Northern Ireland. It's our intention to support the Northern Ireland government in the programme which they have set in hand.
In fact, the Conservatives, who'd just been elected to office, embarked on a policy of coercion. Powers were taken that made a 6-month sentence mandatory for rioting, and the army was ordered to get tougher. Maudling clearly found the situation confusing and difficult. After all, as Home Secretary, he had other things on his mind. Armed searches were alienating the Catholic community. In the Lower Falls, a search which produced 100 guns involved extensive damage to Catholic property. A curfew had to be imposed to stop subsequent rioting. Bread and milk had not been freely allowed into the area during the curfew.
Said on all the TV reports, BBC and ITV, that food and milk got into this area. If it got in, the people were not allowed out onto the street until 5 o'clock. So what good was food and bread? And I stood and I personally watched while a milk truck was turned away. And I stood with, I must have been about 50 mothers, wives, crying, begging to get in to see their family, and a truckload of Scottish troops come out past us, and one beside the driver made the finger sign at us while we were standing there. Our children had no food, trying to get in to see what had happened to our families.
Have you noticed?
It hasn't happened according to the papers tonight. It's all a big dream. All we hear is about the impartiality of the Great British Army.